So obviously we know that Semra did the gong thing on purpose, right? Just to reiterate the timing of all of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first pillar that Semra put up there, shifting consumer demand, because honestly, we are in quite a challenging time. I'm an ex-advertising guy. I spent the first 15 years of my career working at an advertising agency. I don't know how many of you work in communication, brand side, agency side. Let's have some hands up. A few of you, okay. Admittedly, talking about regeneration, talking about advertising being positive is a little bit like pitching peace at an arms conference. Obviously, fundamentally, advertising fuels GDP, fuels growth. There are significant reports that does show that for every pound, for every lira you spend, you will get 5 to 6 back in GDP. So how do we find the right balance? Because if any of you are going to succeed with pitching any of the stuff I'm going to talk about on stage, you'll have to find a business case for it. I spent the last many years writing books, thinking about this balancing act between sustainability and marketing. Is it achievable? But I think honestly, and I know that John Grant, who's up after me, will talk a lot about the urgency. But if we fundamentally look at where we are right now, we're not at a good place. Our planetary footprints, Semra said there's a lot of speakers from different countries. I come from Denmark. When people tell me, oh, you're such a sustainable country, I'm like, what nonsense. We are climate pigs. Our carbon footprint is 5 to 6 times more than it should be. So how can brands help all of us to lower those footprints? How can you all think about how you drive this change? I think that's a key challenge, because what you cannot measure, you cannot change. And we just need to go back to the time of the pandemic, and we actually did see that people changed behaviors on a massive scale. So it is possible. That makes me a little bit hopeful that it is achievable. Yet obviously we're back at sort of revenge shopping, revenge traveling, so there's still a good way to go. But this is exactly the intersection where I think it's so important. How do we create this new way forward? And I have never, in all the time that I've been talking about this topic, I've never seen more pressure on all of you in this room, in terms of the activism, in terms of the expectations. For all of you who have children, there's a lot of explanation to do in terms of where we're heading right now. So how do we change this? How do we change the narrative? I think fundamentally, first of all, we need to think about how we create brands that help lower footprints, that help us embrace new product types, that helps us live healthier lives, more regenerative lives, that don't look at us as consumers, but as wholehearted beings. The two different ways of doing that is obviously to be what I would call a traditional purposeful brands that talk a lot about themselves and your efforts, or being a transformative brand that actually think about how you can help pivot people towards more carbon-friendly living. Why I say this is the latest stuff from my latest book, The Hero Trap. Why I want to reiterate that today is because when you are actually as a brand who stands behind people as a coach and say, hey, you know what, John? Hey, you know what, Semra? We can actually help you towards that lower carbon footprint. We can inspire you to embrace new product types. And if you think about it, within every category, if you are a car company, how can you get people, or how can you integrate your services and innovations around public transport, car sharing, pushing people towards EVs? If you're in the agricultural business, how can you do something similar? And by taking a transformative approach, you're much more likely to actually trigger people to do something about it. So one thing is, of course, you need to get your operations in order. Lower carbon footprint of the stuff you sell. This is one example from a German discount market. This is not because the falafel is on discount, but this is actually them promoting how they lower the carbon footprint of the falafel. But the massive thing is, how do we actually encourage all of us to change behavior patterns? to choose the carbon-friendlier option. And then it becomes a competitive advantage. If you, across your portfolio, can help people do that. This is an example from a Swedish burger chain. I think we've had Max at one point at Sustainable Brands here. What they actually do is they put the carbon footprint on the product, so you can compare. And what's so fascinating about that, we know that it works. If you give people a good enough reason to choose the right thing, combined with the right price and the right quality, it drives change. The EU energy label is an amazing example of that. That energy label, when you're out buying a flat screen, obviously you want to look at it and you want to compare. And if you are deciding whether you should choose a Philips or a Samsung, this is the determining factor. And this is exactly what we need to think about, how you can use this as a competitive edge. Because as I said, this is really on top of mind right now. It is obviously how we can live healthier, carbon friendlier, and if you can give them that extra excuse, this will drive growth. This will drive your category while lowering impact. And let me give you one good example. I don't know your philosophy around dishwashing, but my girlfriend always tells me you need to rinse the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher. But P&G, with one of their brands, obviously wanted to say and taught the new innovation and really say, wait a moment, with Cascade, all you need to do is scrape, load, and it's done. Again, by doing this, actually getting to the category winner, getting people to change behaviors, cutting down on water footprint, so actually really driving change. So this is really about figuring out that these two things don't need to be competing. Sustainability can be that extra factor where you actually drive change. Because if you can't pitch the business case, you won't win. Let me give you another example from Google, actually adding a lot of benefits across their product in terms of saying, what is the most sustainable way you can get from A to B, and helping guide people. We know that especially young people right now are searching actively for living more sustainably, for living more healthy, for living more in balance. So this is one big marketing opportunity. You know the shift is coming. You can try and delay that decision if you're in the car industry or if you're in agriculture, but people will judge you for that. So either today you can take a proactive decision or a reactive decision. And so by doing this, it is really fundamentally about planning a shift. A specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound shift where you plan 1, 2, 3 years ahead. If you're right now selling potato chips, how do you make it possible for me to show that there is a better option? How do you make it comparable? How do you use this to drive a category? This is so important. And let me give you another last example here. During COVID, one of the things that the German public transport system did was, in fact, that they offered this €9 ticket. So a really clever price encouragement. Price incentives do work. The amazing thing was people actually used more public transportation, but only for a limited period of time. So as soon as the initiative stopped, people got back to their old behaviors, which is a really sad reminder of human behaviors, which I talked about around COVID as well. If you don't do this on a continuous basis, and this is the same with sustainable brands, purposeful brands, purpose only works in the long term. So plan for the long term, and then you can succeed. So for me, when I look at leadership, when I look at brands, and I want to see who is doing it well, right now you have to step up and take a measured approach and create these shifts within your category. This is how you become a leader. But for me, the real leaders are those brands that help us achieve amazing things, that pushes us forward, that compels us to go forward. So that's my little reminder to all of you, how we create shifts and how we can hopefully use the toolbox we have in marketing to actually use sustainability, ESG, to drive category change. You can learn more about some of those specific shifts and some of the work from my latest 2 books, The Hero Trap and Good Advertising. Thank you so much.